Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a reconsideration of Daniel Barenboim's Beethoven cycle, the good one, the one with the Staatskapelle Berlin, not the later one he did with the East-West, whatever it was called, thing in Palestine, which was really just a political statement rather than an artistic statement, in my view. Anyway, we're not going to go into that. We're talking about this really splendid Beethoven cycle because, we just heard him do an absolutely vile Franck Symphony in D minor and other really second-rate recordings over the past couple of years. Apparently, he has a degenerative neurological condition. I don't know. He should know better. I don't care. I care because I wish him well. I care about that. I don't want anyone to suffer. I have a degenerative neurological condition. I have multiple sclerosis. So believe me, I get it. But, there's a difference between feeling sympathy and having to evaluate the artistic products of somebody who doesn't know that what he's producing is no longer worthy of him, which is sad. It's terribly sad. And so for that reason, I am going back to the year 2000, actually, and his original release on Teldec, remember Teldec, of his Beethoven cycle with the Staatskapelle Berlin. And let me see, it was special. You could see, because it came in this hard plastic thing, which I never got rid of. And it's so special that I have absolutely no clue how to open it. It's special when you can't even get into the box. It's just, yes. You do this. It opens like that. And then you've got this flappy paper thing. And if you are really careful, you can actually get some of the CDs out. You don't even need my CD extraction kit. You can actually just take them out, and they're in nice cardboard sleeves, and they're very good. So there. Okay. Yeah, that's how you do it. It took me a while to figure it out. It's been a while since I've taken it out because it's been reissued a few times, in a slim box and then in that fat Barenboim Beethoven box, all kinds of different ways. But this was the original. Here it was. And I remember really, it was fascinating when it first came out because in those days, Teldec was supporting DVD audio. And I heard some of these in France where they were, the major labels were battling it out. It was like, it was like, what you call it, VHS versus Beta, remember? And so we had the SACD people and the DVD audio people. And these things were DVD audios as well as normal CDs. And you could go and listen to them as DVD audio. And it was really not terribly different or terribly special, in these circumstances in which they were playing it for us in these, it was a convention at MEDEM, where I used to do the Con Classical Awards. And so they had these setups, it was not an acoustically flattering environment, even though they rented special rooms and set up all their equipment and all that stuff. It was a whole thing. So, they were sort of the showpiece recordings for the new technology as well. They're very well recorded. They sound absolutely beautiful. They're gorgeous sounding. But I don't want to talk about the sonics and the engineering. What I want to talk about is Barenboim and his Beethoven, because this was a very, very important Beethoven cycle. It won a Con Classical Award, and it came out the same year as Claudio Abbado's Berlin cycle, and they couldn't have been more different. And there's a wonderful backstory to all of this, which some of you will remember, because when Karajan was gone, there was a huge commotion to see who was going to get Berlin. It was a really big deal, right? To see who was going to get the Berlin Phil. The Berlin Phil, the greatest orchestra in the world, which it never was, but that's another issue. It was a very politically charged environment. And who wanted? Lauren Mazel wanted it, and Barenboim wanted it, and Abbado wanted it. All these people wanted it, and Abbado got it. And that was a huge slap in the face to all the people who didn't get it because they were very, 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 very pissed. But Barenboim got the Staatskapelle Berlin. And, that was never an orchestra that had any kind of cachet, the way the Berlin Philharmonic did. But he was determined, Barenboim was, to stick it to him. And this Beethoven cycle really represents his effort to show what the traditional, in the best sense, the traditional German style of Beethoven playing, the romantic style of Beethoven, really sounded like in modern terms. Barenboim was known as a disciple of Furtwängler, and rightly so, because he believes in a sort of flexible tempos and all the sorts of things that Furtwängler used to do with his Bruckner and Brahms and Beethoven. And Barenboim had made a tremendous pile of really, really uninteresting recordings. Really surprising. I mean, his first Bruckner cycle in Chicago was very exciting. His later remakes with Berlin, by the way, were not terribly interesting. Then he did them again and again and again. His Schumann in Chicago was very good. His remakes with the Staatskapelle Berlin were amazing. Came out after this. But then he did a bunch of other things with this orchestra. They weren't so good. They've been steadily declining. So I really wanted to talk about something he did when he was at his absolute best. You know that these people were making a tremendous effort, really a tremendous effort to show what they could do and to put their own special spin. Because remember, in 2000, when Barenboim made this cycle, which is incredibly consistent, there are no bad performances. The only issue is whether you like the approach. If you like the approach, you're going to like them all because they're marvelous. They're uniformly marvelous, splendidly played, and full of that sort of romantic ardor. They're not too fast. They're not ridiculously slow either. They're full of energy and bigness and boldness of vision. There's no point, like I said, in talking about individual performances because they're all really good. I mean, really solid and of a type. And like I said, the type in question was kind of radical in 2000 because by 2000, the period instrument people had basically taken over the universe and were telling people how Beethoven's really supposed to sound. And Barenboim couldn't have cared less. I mean, he was totally uninterested in that sort of thing. He was doing Beethoven as he understood, as had been handed down to him by his mentors. And it was a perfectly legitimate, let's not forget, a perfectly legitimate, historically correct view of Beethoven. It just wasn't the period instrument people's view of Beethoven. And the interesting thing is that this set came out at the same time as Abbado's with the Berlin Phil. Now, Abbado's was monumentally boring, and it was done with a reduced orchestra and with all of these sort of period bells and whistles attached to it, swift tempos, light, dainty, dance-like, and a total snooze fest. It was so bad that it was quietly withdrawn and reissued as the soundtracks to a series of videos that Abbado made at the same time in Italy with the Berlin Phil. And it was a much better cycle, the live recordings. They really, really were better. But it was the same approach. And it was very interesting to compare the two. Very, very interesting. Abbado's was his, sounded sort of like everybody else's because he was doing what everyone else was doing. It's not that it wasn't serious or that it wasn't decent. It really suited Abbado as a conductor because he was never one for the grand romantic gesture, Pace, his Mahler, and other things. He wasn't. He was a classicist by nature, which is interesting because he was terrible at music of the classical period, but he was super when it came to like Brahms and that kind of stuff. Mendelssohn, that classicizing romantic school. That was his Fach. Beethoven, you could argue, was not that. I mean, he can be played that way. It works okay that way. But Beethoven was a forward-looking visionary. And if you wanted to hear Beethoven, the forward-looking visionary, this was the cycle to get. It really was just tremendously exciting. And so when it came out in the year 2000, I should point out, ClassicsToday.com had just started. We started in the fall of 1999. And I wrote in a editorial feature about this cycle, talking about how it was, something that was in that grand German tradition, and it was great to hear that it was still alive and kicking, and it was done so well, and all that. But it wasn't a regular review in the review, so there isn't one effectively on the Classics Today site. I'm not quite sure what happened to that feature. I can't find it because it was so long ago. So I feel it's only fitting now, when Barenboim seems to be in the twilight of his career, and has really kind of disappointed for a little while, that we talk about some of the wonderful things that he did. Because here you've got a point of view, a strong point of view, played to the nines, realized as perfectly as I think it would have been possible for anyone to do it. And it's one of the great Beethoven cycles, and one of the most distinctive and characterful. It really is. And so I wanted to mention it to you now, so that you don't forget it, so that we remember what a great artist Barenboim could be when he was on. And he was often on. He was often not. Rather like his mentor, Furtwängler, who on any given day could be incandescent or just terrible. And you never know which one was going to show up. You really didn't. But here, the great Barenboim showed up. And so I wanted to bring it to your attention and suggest that you give it a listen, because you'll really appreciate, I think, the distinctive qualities he brings to his interpretation of the music. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.